All right, terrific. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of the year for 2024 from CrisisReady, which is a collaboration between Direct Relief and researchers at Harvard, as well as a number of other institutions. We're going to be talking about disasters and data collaboratives in Latin America, focusing specifically on the current case of work that's been ongoing in Mexico in response to the impact of Hurricane Otis. And we're joined by my name is Andrew Schroeder. I'm the Vice President for Research and Analysis at Direct Relief, and I'm the co-director of CrisisReady. We're going to be joined by Stefaan Verhulst from the NYU Governance Laboratory and the Data Tank. From Stefaan, we'll go to Javier Moya from United Nations Development Program, Céline Jacquin from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, and Juan Flores from the Statistical Office of the State of Guerrero, which is where the principal impact of the hurricane took place. I just wanted to say a few words first about kind of what the topic of interest here is and what we're interested in terms of the impact of the hurricane. So the hurricane itself, Hurricane Otis, is, I think, a pretty good example of the kinds of extreme risks that we're now facing as a result of, right now, the combination of climate change and the El Nino effect in the Pacific. And just to give you a sense of kind of why the hurricane itself was sort of exceptional, it was first detected on October 15th of last year as a low pressure zone in the Pacific, about a few hundred miles off the western coast of Central America. By October 23rd, it had developed into a hurricane, and then over the next 24 hours experienced what is called explosive intensification, where it was named a hurricane category 1 by the 24th of October. By 10 p.m. that same night was upgraded to a category 5, and by the time it made landfall at 1:30 a.m. on October 25th, it was seeing wind speeds at 270 kilometers per hour. So, going essentially from a tropical storm to one of the most powerful storms to hit the country of Mexico within 24 hours, which gave minimal ability to evacuate, to sort of prepare for the scale of impact, if you can do such things, et cetera. And this has had really just catastrophic impacts on the property damage. Estimates vary widely, at least $10 billion plus US dollars. Official death toll and missing death toll is at 52 and 32, although this remains a matter of some dispute, which folks can maybe address. And in our own work, in support of the data collaborative there, we have sort of worked with Google on their Sky model, which evaluated over 380,000 buildings in the Acapulco area, and estimated that about 46% of those saw major damage to destruction. That number goes up to about almost 80% if you look at minor damage. And this is distributed in a way that, in part due to the nature of construction materials, is not exclusively concentrated at the coast where the resort areas are, but really extends pretty far inland in lower population areas where there's been really devastating impacts on the infrastructure of Acapulco. In collaboration with the statistical office in Guerrero, we were able to sort of change that in to look at neighborhoods so they can focus in on certain neighborhoods that have seen greater impacts than others, which then relates to Acapulco's sort of extensive social inequality landscape, where sort of poorer areas have really seen really devastating impacts, and a lot of the sort of investment questions have concentrated on restoration of coastal areas. So looking then at some of the mobility data, really drastic drops in the early going, and then areas like Chilpancingo, which is to the north, seeing significant increases. So there's quite a lot of ability for new data sets, novel data sets to make an impact on helping to orient to the impact of the storm itself, the change in the population, damage to infrastructure, and I'm sure all of our participants will talk about a lot of that. But, you know, in order for that to have effect, in order for that to influence the direction of the rebuilding, it requires a pretty broad collaborative effort. And in the case of Hurricane Otis, we've seen this remarkable group come together, composed of folks from the United Nations, from the government of Mexico, from NGOs, research institutes, international analytics efforts like Humanitarian, OpenStreetMap, and others. And so, this is, I think, one of the most interesting examples I've seen right now of what Stefaan has been talking about for many years as the rapid data collaborative, and the ability to kind of quickly bring together the right people in the right place at the right time to bring data to bear on the kinds of decisions that need to be made in disasters and recovery. We're going to start with Stefaan to talk us through the concept of the Rapid Data Collaborative, and then we'll bring together a group of key participants from the Data Collaborative in Mexico that is right now working on the response to Hurricane Otis. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Stefaan Verhulst.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. And thanks, everyone, for joining. And let me share my screen. Can you see this, Andrew?
Yes.
All right, great. So very quickly, indeed, I think my function here is to mainly set the stage on, anyway, what are data collaboratives? And more importantly, how can we scale up data collaboratives in a more rapid fashion than what we typically have seen? And again, what has happened in Mexico is really applaudable, but also quite often hard to establish, mainly because we are missing a few foundational pieces, which I will talk about, that as a community, we actually really should try to establish as well. And as already mentioned, let's see when I get started here. Yeah. So as already mentioned, I'm the co-founder of two organizations. One is the GovLab, based here in New York, and the other is the Data Tank, based in Brussels. But I'm also a research professor here at NYU. And a lot of the work that we are doing is really trying to understand how can data help in innovating how we go about addressing public problems. And of course, disasters is one area that requires a lot more innovation in how we collaborate, but also a lot more innovation in how we start using data. But obviously, similar kind of challenges exist in other areas of society and other societal challenges as well. And a lot of the, sorry, I'm gonna have to get used to my thing. A lot of the work that we are doing starts from kind of two important observations. The first one, which is not new to most people on this call, is that obviously digitalization has really rapidly changed the data space. We have seen a massive datafication where new sources are being created as a result of new instrumentation, but also as a result of new ways to actually store and analyze data as well. And so we see a massive amount of variety of data that can be reused for other purposes. And I think that's the real, from my point of view, the real opportunity in the space, which is that data is already collected, quite often for other purposes, but it could also be used for instance, disaster relief as well, given the unique characteristics of the data, especially digital data that we currently have. Now, the real challenge is, of course, now that we have data that is already collected, the real challenge is most likely that you don't have access to the data. So one of the key challenges is quite often not the fact that there is no data. The key challenge is quite often, how do we make sure that we have access to data? How do we make sure that the demand for data matches the supply of data, which turns out to be quite often elsewhere and more in the private sector? And so while a lot of the focus has been on kind of the preventing misuse of data from my point of view, society also has to spend a lot more time on actually how do we not misuse, but how do we prevent the misuses of data by really focusing on how do we actually reuse data. And it turns out that in that data space, we have a lot of data asymmetries, right? By which I mean where the demand is actually not aligned with the supply, and where the supply is very hard to actually get to. And so in order to address that problem of data asymmetry that really stands in the way of how we go about innovating, how we go about certain solutions, we really need new models. And that's where we have started working on the concept of data collaboratives, which I kind of started working on in 2015, because we do need new kinds of partnerships between, on the one hand, those that need data, and on the other hand, those that have data, and then, of course, everything in between, by which I mean those that can make sense of the data and those that can act upon the insights once we have ultimately made sense and have accessed the data. And so that's where data collaboratives comes in. And over the years, if you go to our website, datacollaboratives.org, you will find kind of the largest repositories of examples on data collaboratives and how they have been established. And of course, many of them also exist in the disaster relief space as well. And so what I will do in the remainder of my time is briefly reflect on some of the lessons learned by working on data collaboratives, having established data collaboratives ourselves, but also having studied them in kind of the aggregate as well. And I think the first, I just have no, this doesn't work that well. The first lesson learned is that there is no one way of actually establishing data collaboratives. It quite often depends on what I call the matrix of conditionality that one needs to explore, by which I mean how open can the data be versus how collaborative is the collaboration necessary in order to extract insight. And based upon this kind of matrix of, on the one hand, open versus closed, and on the other hand, very participatory versus more independent, we've identified kind of 6 models of data collaboratives. And again, today is not a day to go really into depth about the different models, but I think it is important to understand that there are a whole diversity of actually data collaboratives, ranging from, for instance, data pooling. And so here an example where, for instance, Toyota has pooled some of its data in order to also provide insight on mobility. Sorry, this is not working well. To, for instance, prizes and challenges where data is made available. For instance, in this context, mobile phone data in order to understand migration patterns, for instance, to trusted intermediaries where you have individuals or individual organizations providing access to data and quite often also analyzing the data, to ultimately where no data is shared, but where the intelligence is shared. And so examples here is, for instance, the Spanish bank BBVA that has done a lot of that kind of working with partners. They don't really provide access to the data, but they provide insight to the data as a way that, okay, this is not working. How is that? Why is this not working? So that's the first kind of big lesson learned, is that there are a variety of models out there that can be used. The second big lesson learned is that, and none of this will be new to most of you, is that this is not easy to do, right? It's actually quite, it takes quite a lot of energy, and especially it is quite often very slow in order to establish data collaboratives. And more specifically, the real challenge in the data collaborative space is that it's quite often not systematic, right? It's quite often a pilot here and there, or it is something that is quickly set up and then it disappears again, which in some cases makes sense, but overall quite often means that we are losing a lot of the infrastructure that is built, and then we need to rebuild it again. The second challenge is that it's quite often not sustainable, right, in terms of both cost, but also in actually having people committed and organizations committed to the broader goal of data collaboration. And of course, there are also challenges with regard to how do you do this in a responsible way? How do you make sure that you actually don't lose the trust of those that you seek to help as well? And so from my point of view, one of the key challenges is how do we, and of course, all of this slows down the creation of data collaboratives. And so one of the key challenges and the key questions that we have tried to explore is how do we make data collaboration, especially as it relates to, for instance, disaster response, more systematic, more sustainable, more responsible, but also more agile, more rapid as well. And I will just briefly touch on a few, from my point of view, foundational issues that are needed in order to make the matching of demand and supply much faster, but also more systematic as well. And the first one is that we actually need to strengthen the demand for data, which might sound for many of you pretty obvious. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious if a disaster happens that you need access to data, but quite often what we have seen is that that demand is quite often not really specified, or really not specified in a way that the supply of data can understand what is it that you actually need and how can we then provide it to meet that demand. And so towards that end, I've been calling for the creation of a new science of questions, where we actually spend a lot more time on what are actually the questions that we need answering. For instance, it's pretty obvious that the question at times of disaster is, where are people, right? And but of course, that needs to be more specified with regard to specific regions or with regard to specific segments as well. And so my suggestion to this community is to also make sure that you actually have a list of questions that might be common in different disasters that you can start socializing before a disaster happens, so that you actually have a clear sense on what are the top questions that you need to answer in order to be able to inform disaster response as well. Now, they exist in many kind of humanitarian response context, but as I said, they're quite often not shared in advance. They're quite often muddled, and as a result, the supply side is quite often confused on what actually you really need as well. And so what we've done is built this kind of 100 questions initiative. I'm not going to go into detail here on how to do this, but it might be interesting for the kind of community of disaster response and the humanitarian community in general to really come up with our kind of the 100 questions or the 10 questions that are needed at the time of crisis, for which private sector data or non-traditional data sources could be beneficial, and socialize that with actually those sources in advance. The second element is, once you have a demand, you actually also need, of course, a way to engage with the supply side. And that turns out to be quite often one of the hardest problems, by which I mean, who do you even contact at the level of the supply side? And the reason why that is hard is because we actually don't have the human infrastructure on the supply side to respond to solicitations for the data. And so here we've done a lot of work in actually establishing this concept of data stewards, people that have a mandate to respond to solicitations for data, and then also have the sophistication in a way that they can respond in a responsible, systematic way as well. The function there is to really look into how to collaborate, but also how to protect the data in a way that it doesn't, of course, undermine the data subjects, for instance, or harm them, but then also how to make sure that actually anyone acts upon the insight. And that requires kind of a new skill set. And it is a skill set that is, of course, related to data, such as, for instance, how do you develop metadata in a way that actually allows for reuse, right? How do you actually develop data provenance standards that also informs kind of representation and potential bias as well? But it also requires skill sets with regard to how to set up a data collaborative, what is fit for purpose. I mean, I've showed you kind of 6 models of data collaboratives that, anyway, depends on the context, the demand, and the expectations that require different kind of models. And a data steward should be skilled in actually understanding what might be fit for purpose, but also, of course, questions with regard to How do you even set up a data sharing agreement? How do I get the internal sign-off? And how do I then subsequently actually evaluate whether we made any impact as well? And I think that's quite often missing as well. The other element that is missing from the supply side is that they quite often have not thought about what is it that makes sense for them to start sharing data. And again, clearly in times of disaster, there's a clear societal case, i.e. prevent, of course, harm and prevent victims. But you also have to start thinking, what is the business case for doing so? Because without that, it's very hard to do it in a systematic way. And so we've developed this kind of case, this kind of methodology to start identifying the business case for actually data reuse in the public interest, even during disasters, so that you actually prepared and that you also not do it once, but that you actually can contribute to a variety of humanitarian concerns as well. The fourth element that is missing very quickly is, of course, this challenge of data sharing agreement, which quite often takes a majority of the time in order to establish. And what we have done here is basically trying to demystify kind of data sharing agreements in order to really understand what is needed in order to rapidly access data. But more importantly, what we have called upon together with Andrew and others is that we really, as a community and as a society, we really need to work more and more on what we call mutual collaborative frameworks, that is in place before a disaster happens, so that you have already kind of a commitment, and that if a disaster happens or any other kind of demand for data in the public interest emerges, that there is actually an agreed framework under which you can provide access to data. And that includes, of course, data sharing agreements. It also includes a clear way to scope the demand, right? So that actually the supply side understands what is it that you need. And it also includes designation of a data steward, for instance, that would facilitate access to data in a far more rapid fashion as well. And then lastly, and then I will conclude here, Andrew, in order to make sure that I don't take all the time here. What we also need is really what I call the social license, meaning if you start using, for instance, cell phone data, or you start using other non-traditional data, what's the expectation of actually cell phone users on how their data is being used? And how do you make sure that you actually have a social license for reusing the data in manners that obviously support society, but might still create distrust and still might actually create social unrest as a result of not having the social license of actually reusing data? And here, one example of how to get that is something what we call kind of data assemblies, by which I mean where you bring, anyway, citizens' assemblies to the table in order to understand under what conditions would they feel comfortable that that data is used for other purposes. And this is an example of the data assembly that we created in New York City during COVID-19, so that the city had actually a social license to leverage cell phone data and other data in a way that aligned with expectations of New Yorkers as well. And of course, all this needs to be brought together in what we call a data collaborative stack, where you actually, anyway, if something happens, you don't have to figure all this out. You have a way to formulate a question. You have a way to actually understand what's the model that is fit for purpose. You have a data sharing agreement that can be repurposed. And you ultimately also have, of course, not only the governance, but the technical stack as well. And I'm going to stop here. Otherwise, I go into propaganda mode on where you can learn all of that, which is, of course, anyway, some of our courses that we have as well. And I hope this was meaningful for this community as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stefaan. And so with that sort of like idea or set of ideas in mind about data collaboration, data stewardship, and then the rapid, sustainable collaboration. I want to turn to our colleagues in Mexico, who I think are engaged in a really remarkable example of data collaboratives, even if we don't necessarily call it that, although maybe we should. I wanted to, would it be possible to just I know that Javier Moya from UNDP was maybe going to just kick things off with a 5-minute description of UNDP's role in all of this, since I think you guys have been convening and organizing this. Javier, did you want to just get things started really quick, and then I'll turn to Céline and to Juan?
Okay. It works as well. I'm looking for Céline. His presentation is here.
Yes, I see Céline's presentation up, but
Can Céline go first?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
That's fine.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So I have shared my screen. Can you see it? I don't see it in the.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I'll share very briefly about HOT, firstly, for the ones who don't know the organization. So, and then I will pass to what we did exactly in Acapulco. So we are a global organization distributed in 4 regional offices. So I represent the Latin American Caribbean office here. I'm Céline Jacquin, regional manager. And what we work on is to create a bridge between mapping data that is open and collaborative and the local actors and stakeholders that actually need the data in specific context of emergencies or for sustainable development. So we collaborate with national and local organizations, the governments, to meet their needs, understand their needs first, meet their needs, and allow better action and planning in the territory through efficient and opportunate data. We ensure that the necessary cartographic data is available and is generated. For that, we mobilize volunteer communities, and we also provide methodological advice and training as it's needed for other issues related to information management. So not only creating data, but using the data and make also a strategic use of it, sometimes around advocacy and visualizations. Why do we do that? So many of the locations vulnerable to disaster and where services are least accessible to population are often least mapped, and it's a crucial reality in the global south. And maps are critical in the hours, days after an emergency and after a disaster. So we try to help the right people that are on the ground, saving people and walking around the crucial and critical infrastructure to actually act, having the right data to do so. Without map, we can't get to the right places where people are. We can't know sometimes where the people are, and it's the first moment of the creation of our organization in Haiti 15 years ago, when there were no map of this country, so no possibility to know where people were living and where was the biggest concentration of people. And also, without maps, we can't get the supplies on time and effectively to people. So the digital participation is crucial, or the citizen science, as we can also call that, in a key articulation with the new technologies and also with artificial intelligence. It's not a topic we will develop here, but it's important to understand that very manual processes can be concretely articulated with artificial intelligence in a very efficient way at some good moment and optimus moment of the cycle of construction and validation of data. So Okay, so how do we work with communities to create this data? We generate mapping activations quickly after the disasters, anywhere in the region, anywhere in the world, and we constantly train and mobilize very reactive communities. We have several mechanisms to maintain motivation and skills, and we bring them closer to maintain tools and we always develop user-friendly tools with cultural relevance, also to allow people in any language, in any level of accessibility to technology and to internet, to be able to use these tools to create information. This is how we focus on several issues. On remote mapping from anywhere using satellite imagery or post-disaster imagery, and that's where we use drone imagery, and that's where also we need to articulate very quickly to actors on the ground that are able to generate these images. We also coordinate with in global companies that can generate post-disaster satellite imagery. We also promote and train and accompany local mapping exercises for damage verification on the ground and other issues that are needed according to each context. We develop and adapt tools based on collaboration with open source developer communities, tools that are open source, able to be improved at any moment and adapted to each context at any moment. And we permanently train local actors, governments, large communities, institutions like UNDP in countries, in the use of the same tools for which we have a long-term vision. We try to have very mature tools that are maintained, so we know that the skills developed are useful in the long term and for policy making. So just a brief word about OpenStreetMap, because the large amount of data we create are on OpenStreetMap. So except when it could create a problem of privacy or put people at risk. But in OpenStreetMap, it remains free, permanently updated, and available for any use, and easy to download for any actor, and centralized in the same place for any place of the world. So you can download at the same place data on Acapulco, but also on any place in China, in Turkey, etc. So for the ones who don't know OpenStreetMap, it's a mature cartography database. It has 20 years of existence now, and thousands and millions of people actually collaborate to this map from the scratch to capture all the built infrastructure and administrative delimitations of the entire world in a single place for any use. So it's the main tool we can say we use. And then with the different phases of data creation I have explained, we are able to guide a local stakeholder to create different products they need. Analysis, modeling, and different material, also risk atlases, local development plans, etc., with the different information. We also create the bridges that guarantee that a local government with short term of their administration are able to maintain this knowledge and maintain this data, collaborating closely with universities, for example. So we also guarantee that these bridges are created, and when it's needed, the agreements and MOU, and also collaboration with specific groups and specific faculties that could be a permanent support for the local government. So in terms, some quick examples before getting to Acapulco of what we have been doing in the LAC Hub. The LAC Hub only has 1.5 years of existence, so our work has this time of work. So in the region, we are actually working with disaster attention and disaster preparedness with some countries. The plan is to continue with each country of the region, but at the beginning we have worked specifically with Ecuador in agreement with the risk management secretariat and building the same dynamic with more countries. So we have been detecting with them the high risk areas in the country, and we are doing mapping, preparedness mapping since spring last year. And we have been attending in the same way we are doing in Acapulco, some specific disaster, for example, in the area of Esmeraldas. We also generate there and in other countries such as Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, comprehensive anticipatory mapping. We continuously train the authorities together with universities the universities that already collaborate with the authorities for permanent coordination in the mapping of the new areas and rapid mapping in case of emergency, and also of a kind of data support and analysis support, as we will see in Acapulco. It was the case there. We work specifically also in forest fires risk with communities and local brigades in Mexico and Colombia with UNDP Colombia. And we also work on proactive mapping on vulnerable areas in favelas and informal settlements in Brazil, specifically Mexico and Guatemala. So now getting to Acapulco. So just to precise that in any case of emergency, we create a workflow completely adapted to the needs. So it's not a rigid workflow. What we did in Acapulco and what we do all the time is to create to build the coordination with authorities. Sometimes it's the most difficult part of the activation. It means it can take weeks because right in the context of emergencies there is relative chaos, and it's very difficult for the same authorities to coordinate between them. So it's also difficult for us to enter this coordination. And from this coordination, we assess the needs. So the needs change over the time. So we first assess the first need, but the needs are updated progressively during the activation. What we did at the beginning, after we could understand the first needs, was to create a general mapping activation in OpenStreetMap. So in the very broad area around Acapulco, we knew at this very beginning that in Acapulco, the general mapping on OpenStreetMap would take a lot of time because it's a very dense area, it's a big city. So we decided to first map around Acapulco, while at the same time we were able to understand a little better what was the specific needs within the city, and while we were obtaining the first drone imagery that would be helpful to map the specific problem post-disaster, and it was damage building. So here we can see some of the images of the tasking manager we used to distribute the effort of the mapping around Acapulco. And at the same time, we were inserting ourselves a little better in the coordination group with Senapred, civil protection, UNICEF that took this role at the beginning. Very important to create the group of coordination that is now evolved in a reconstruction committee that Juan Manuel will explain a little after me. And we reprioritized. Maybe you can't see that in the images I show of the tasking manager, but there are some little areas in red. And it was because Senapred at some moment was able to say that they would give a specific support in these localities at this moment, and they would need the data very quickly. So we redistributed the effort, making this area absolutely an absolute priority in this general mapping. After that, we assessed other kinds of need, very different, but around data management in general. So civil protection at the beginning was organizing street cleaning processes to be able to access damaged building and to do more operation, but there was a very big chaos in organizing the reports of the operations in the streets. So we help the brigades to use better Kobo Toolbox, to have a proper form in Kobo Toolbox that would be as a sort of report, daily report that could assess the daily action day by day. And we also organized in the following weeks an analysis with cross-referencing information. So using the effort of universities, several universities participated there, and we create a coordination group specific to data analysis with the University of the State of Mexico, the state of Guerrero, of Guanajuato, Mexico City, and Ciudad Juarez, and also the National Network of Students of Geography. So a group of more or less 10 people participating in, for example, analyzing an estimation of people living in damaged building we previously mapped in Acapulco. So finalizing my intervention, I would like to highlight the importance of a coordination for preparedness, but to maintain this effort, because what we see all the time in all the country is that we are quite able to organize a coordination and collaboration around a specific emergency, but then these coordination groups just disappear, or we just continue our activities in something else, and we are not prepared for the next emergency in the same country. So I really hope that, and it's something that we look for at HOT, to maintain our follow-up to emergencies. That's why I'm also part of the reconstruction group. To be there to assess new eventual needs of data analysis, etc., to maintain the bridge with the universities I've mentioned, and to I hope we will be able, with Senapred, with Protection Civil, to maintain this coordination ready for other eventual emergency. We hope we won't have, but we know it's very probable we will have. So I invite everybody to maintain this vision and to work together. Many thanks.
Terrific. Thank you, Céline. And thank you so much for the work that Humanitarian OpenStreetMap has been doing in response to the hurricane in Acapulco, but also, as you mentioned, across the region and across the world. I wanted to invite either Juan or Javier to join next. I wasn't entirely sure which one you preferred in terms of direction, in terms of sequence. Javier, do you?
Yeah, mine is more kind
You
of.
can go first.
Kind of.
Javier, go.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I can go. Mine is kind of an analysis to introduce what Juan Flores is being coordinating with all this data group for Acapulco and Otis. Okay, as Andrew said, I work for United Nations Development Program, UNDP, Mexico, and I coordinate the projects of resilience and risk management, also the response and recovery. As you know, we don't have, as UNDP, an emergency recovery mandate. We are more an emergency response mandate, but because there are specific UN agencies in charge of that. Anyway, what we are discussing today, data management, images, have been very, very useful for both the emergency stage and the recovery, the present one, recovery stage. Anyway, what I was trying to share with you is more the analysis of this case and previous ones in this, using some of the concepts that very interestingly, the ones that preceded my presentation just introduced. But for us, the important thing is that technology now provides this opportunity, of course, of positioning all the points we need and have these images and everything. But if this balance between supply and demand is not planned, then it won't work. So our main input into this is governance, dialogue, and trust building. And why not the earthquake of 2010? Okay, we lacked technology, but the main balance was the same. I was in the central coordination for emergency team in Port-au-Prince the first month, and specifically the first 10 days, we had this image of satellite image that the European government lab shared with the United Nations, and we had to connect it with the emergency services for rescuing and everything. It was the largest worldwide effort in rescuing, almost 100 teams from different countries speaking all their languages with the satellite, and there were no addresses in Port-au-Prince. If you know IT, you know that most of the streets have no name and no numbers. So we had this beautiful map, very detailed, with all the points that were collapsed, and a lot of calls saying we need help, we are here, we are here, we are here, but they didn't know, they didn't have an address. And so what we did is inviting local taxi drivers, and local taxi drivers could make the interpretation and connecting to the action and further on to development recovery efforts. And that is basically what we lack in most of these efforts. Well, these days we've tried this after the earthquakes in 2017 in Mexico, in the Caribbean, in Dominica, also with the help of some of you, if I understand. And of course, now with Otis in Acapulco. And I think that they asked me what are the main obstacles that we found. Well, sometimes the problem of mandate and bureaucracy is one of the problems. We have in all the countries all these institutions that have the images, but they don't have the protocols to share them. So that is one problem. And some of them argue that it's a national security information they cannot share. Some others have information, but they are private firms, and they have this maybe profit-oriented decision-making system. We have researcher teams, but some of them, because of the system we have in Latin America, a lot copying the system in the United States, that basically promotes and all the success depends on your teamwork publications. So some of these materials are also difficult to share. So in the years, of course, we have to face these obstacles. We have tried some of these the following things in all these experiences. No, the first is having a clear goal. So maybe there's a lot of information, a lot of maps, but not all are needed, not all are necessary. Why? Because we have a clear goal of what we will need, and this is also a need to plan the data sharing and use a basic methodology that has the steps 1, 2, 3, 4. No, so first is having a clear goal so you can really decide what to ask and what it's not so important. No? Then to find the actors, maybe in some countries, we don't know that, we didn't know, for instance, in Central America, that there were projects, international projects that have this information or these maps and this and that. And so the people that is managing the crisis is not aware of, so the main actors have to be mapped, ideally previously, or in the first days. So we have to bring them. Then it's the trust building, and I think that we all know about it, but in the real, for instance, in Mexico at this moment, it's been really important that international organizations, governmental organizations, private sector, within a context of lack of trust, because we are near the general elections, we have a government that is not all the time working together with private sector. So within this context, it's been a real success to bring all them together and build this trust so everybody can share their layers, their information, and this and that. No? Basic rules, you talk about these agreements, okay? You have, well, we have some so to say, templates that can help you, but every case needs a special rules, and don't overrule it. Too structured systems are sometimes not helping us, at least in Latin America. No? So basic rules, and try to find a place for every effort. For instance, in 2017, there was a lot of information coming from, okay, I'm giving water here, and there is a need of water there, but some of this information was not real. Civil society created a system of a lot of bikers, young people with bikes, that went around the city after the earthquake, and they call it verified. So they were just going to verify the information of a demand or a supply of something, no? So these efforts are very rare, so we have to find a place where to put it, no? Then also works to have a kind of data guardian, like Juan Manuel and his institute, but also with these partners like well, Céline and all of them are giving trust to all the others that are sharing their information. So this small group of guardianship that gives more, not legal, but moral or ethic confidence to the rest. And the most important, as I said, for Haiti in 2010 is connecting all this information with the emergency action teams and with the development actors. So, for instance, nowadays in the development arena, we have...
I'm sorry, Javier. I hate to cut you off, but I'm just mindful of the time. We
Yes.
only have a few minutes, and I really want to make sure that Juan Manuel has
can present. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So just cut it there. That all this information has to be connected with the people actually working and doing the things. And Juan Manuel, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm here right now. And my screen is sharing now. You look that?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you and participating here. I will comment on what happened immediately after the Otis phenomenon. This hurricane, Otis, marked a before and after in the history of Acapulco, in the history of our state and our country, because it's a matter about Category 5. Never here in the story of my state, we had a hurricane of that category, of that magnitude. In Acapulco, 99% of the building on the coast was built with anti-seismic protocol. That is why here is a seismic zone, and never have a hurricane of that category. Otis devastated everything at the city, everything at the country, everything at the rural area, because that buildings are, that buildings, rural areas and popular neighborhoods homes are built with filthy materials such as tiles, woods, reeds, etc. As in the previous meteors such as Ingrid and Manuel or Paulina, there was floods. Here, it was the force of the wind, because we have more than 320 kilometers per hour, and the immediately response was confusing, because we don't know what happened at that moment, but we needed to be and provide urgently help. Never in the history has the state of Guerrero had a risk atlas. This is a priority right now. At least not a public one. And the corresponding areas such as civil protection and risk management have been made impossible by the lack of technology resources and trained personnel if these uses. On this occasion, the State Center of Statistics and Geography of the Secretariat of Planning and Regional Development of the State of Guerrero implemented a geographic platform. You are looking right now at the screen. With the Copernicus base map, and thus it was possible to generate rapid attention, strategic planning, routes, and action of immediate support to the population and emergency, and collaboration and articulation with various actors. Carrying water, pantries, food, mats, blankets, clothing, medicines, water, purifiers, tools, cleaning kits, and later establishing community kitchens and strategic points to serve the daily food to the population. That same week, we began to coordinate with UNICEF and UNDP with all possible actors, NGOs, order to begin the second stage that of reconstruction of housing, infrastructure, economy, and environment. We are that stage to date. You are looking the base map, you are looking the geographic platform, and we have a lot of information that a lot of actors are collaborating with us. We are looking some rural areas. We are looking the base map of Copernicus with critical disaster, and it focuses to be introducing help immediately, emergency help to the people. And right now, we are coordinate with commitment from mapping with Javier, with Céline, and Andrew, another for to planning strategies for in a future start a reconstruction from Acapulco. Thanks for invite me to be here, and can you look that work that
Oh, did we just lose one? Okay. Well, I was going to ask him a quick question. Oh, Warren, there you are. You're back. All right. Juan, can you hear me okay? You're on mute. So we are at time, but I just wanted to pick up on the thread from Stefaan, which both Céline and Javier also talked about. And this can go to any of you, but I wanted to you to reflect really quickly on what do you need to make the current collaboration in Mexico sustained? And where do you think the biggest challenge to that sustainment is going to come from? Since you all sort of like picked up on different parts of that, and that could be to any of you. If Juan is having trouble with the connection.
yeah, I'm here. Well, what we need to be reach that information to provide to this base map or to this platform, the collaboration of all actors that inside to Acapulco, to comes to Acapulco, to help to Acapulco. If everyone have information, geographic information about this, about the help, about the reconstruction, about the all activities that had in Acapulco, here in the chat, I'm going to provide my email account and write me and can send me that information, and my team and I can be public that information through that platform.
Okay, perfect. So anyone with information to contribute to the platform, please get in touch with Juan. I think it's a important rallying point as part of the way to sustain this, having that portal and rallying point for information is clearly one of the key pieces. Céline, Stefaan, Javier, did you have any reflections on sort of what is going to be needed to sustain this kind of effort?
Yeah, if I can continue. So if you mean with this kind of effort, just the effort only Acapulco, I think the coordination is strengthening itself all the time. So I think we will be great, and but it's still important to formalize maybe the collaboration of the different institutions that are there, and to do this kind of call to other organizations, other institutions, other universities too, that could be able to bring more data, as Juan Manuel said, but also to bring capacities of analysis. I think it will be more needed now for Acapulco. If you mean to sustain this effort in general, and it's my main problem, I think. The big barrier, I would say, is the lack of continuity between administrations, and it's a reality in the entire world. It's very difficult to really build a good governance around any action, and it will disappear most probably with the next administration. So it's something that CENAPRED is well aware, because I know from different governments behind, we have tried from OpenStreetMap and other organizations to participate in a coordinated effort to have a data and science group to support CENAPRED, and it has been difficult to maintain it. So I would think, but from my ignorance, because I'm not in such a public national institution, but I would think that formalizing, making a huge effort to formalize this kind of collaboration, so it's not easy for the next administration to just throw it away. I would say it's a sort of solution for that. And when we have that, when we have a strong group of coordination around data and technology for disaster management, I'd say that working all the time to find the good way to collaborate, and with which actors part of this group would have to have a close collaboration with which other actors in the different way they can contribute is the key. And I think that CrisisReady has made a good effort in that way, and we should continue.
All right, thank you. Stefaan, did you have any final thoughts on?
Yeah, no, again, thanks. I learned a lot myself here by listening to all of you, but I think obviously when we talk about disaster response, I think the level of intensity of collaboration, right, fluctuates depending on the need as well, which is, anyway, on the one hand, you can formalize it, but then it becomes kind of, anyway, sometimes an empty shell. But I think it's formalizing the method of collaboration is very important, so that if things happen, that you don't have to start scratching and thinking about what is needed again. But then more importantly, as I said, having this network of data stewards that can be activated when needed, I think is quite often missing, right? Having kind of a delegation of, anyway, who to call when needed, I think that's quite often missing. It's not just a repository of data, it's actually a repository of people that we quite often need in order to then be able to activate it, and that's quite often ignored as well. But again, congratulations with all the amazing data collaboration that is happening in the space there.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. And Javier, I wanted to give you any final words before we close.
Well, I agree with Céline, Juan Manuel, and Stefaan. Definitely. I think it still it can grow towards better connecting with the current governance bodies that we have, all the efforts of reconstruction, environmental restoration, water security, housing, because this will give it more viability, more. I mean, if it's more useful in the development setting. So, and related to that, of course, also formalizing the collaboration, because it's already in an existing institution of the government. So it will continue as such, as a map, as a data reservoir, but the body of collaboration would be, as Céline said, also benefit from formalizing kind of collaboration for the rest, at least, of this administration. Also, at this moment, they are making the governmental plan for the next 3 years, and they are including this, but it should be more explicit and clear, so it has enough budget and mandate to continue, no? And probably if it establishes like that, it will go through to the next, but not also focusing into emergency response to future contingencies, but also related with the land use planning, with the development planning schemes that will, be used every year, every month. So I think balance between these two approaches is needed for its sustainability in medium term.
All right, perfect. I think that all of those are important. So go ahead.
Sorry, before we close, I also noticed that Juan Casanova from Social Tech is here, and he also wants to do a contribution. So Juan, go.
Oh, please, Juan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you all, and just to know that we have been trying to support from the distance, and we're really glad of the wonderful work you have all done and shared, and that's like an amazing step. And yeah, just I want to make one note, and going back on what Javier mentioned overall, is that, I mean, after so many years working on the data, not only for disaster, but data for goods seen in Mexico and other Latin American countries, we come ourselves facing the same challenges again and again. And it kind of like seems that there's no way out, because there's usually no political will. Governments change, people change, and I mean, very good and propositive of government officials understand and use data change, and we have to start again, all over again from civil society and pushing with different collaborations. I totally get the GovLab ideal frameworks, and that's how things should be. But if I would like to just share one thing here is, politically, there has to be much more pressure for not only governments, but also for funding for civil society, so that capacity, human capacity, but also data infrastructure, data gathering, can be persistent, and not only when it's needed, in this case, due to an emergency or disaster. That lack of view and strategic understanding of data has actually been one of the biggest flaws in our, I think, approach to data for emergency and reconstruction. So yeah, great to see you all, and hope to continue collaborating.
Yeah, I think the message from, I think, yourself and from others around needing to make sure that collaborations that will be used in disaster are supported in times of non-disaster, so that the networks that Stefaan was describing in terms of data stewardship are not exclusively humanitarian in nature, that they are aimed at a broad spectrum of issues that have a special force during disasters, and therefore there's a reason to activate them, provide some capacity to kind of smooth the transition between administrations. To some degree, international collaboration helps with that as well. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, for instance, obviously you guys are working all over the place, and so you have the ability to activate volunteer networks in a variety of situations, not only humanitarian. Similarly, UNDP, it's notable that you're not a response organization. You are a development and reconstruction organization, and are, in that sense, guiding a lot of this effort towards longer term issues. So I think, with that in mind, about this balance between kind of the timeframes and the resources required in those timeframes, and the networks that we're trying to kind of make sure cohere and that people know about, right? This was part of my goal here, is just to make sure that we log these. Stefan's done this incredible work at datacollaboratives.org to just track them and make sure that people are aware that they exist, so that we can have cumulative knowledge. But this also is an effort to make sure that people are aware that actually there is this exceptional work happening in Mexico right now, and that we have a lot to build on in the response. So thank you very much to everyone for your participation. I really appreciate your time. We will make this video available through CrisisReady, and I will send it back out to everyone in case that you want to share it yourselves, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.